Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. I'm back to recording it on Friday, so hopefully I've caught up to everybody's questions, and let's jump right in and see what we got. I figure we'll start with the newest questions first this time, because why not? Felipe says they have just arrived to New York City to visit a friend. Out of the many retro gaming stores around, do you know if there are some currently open to the public these days, plus safety measures? I'd love to see a PVM with my own eyes for the first time, and of course get my backpack filled with goodies. Thank you, keep those jams rocking. So Felipe, depending where you are in the city, there's a few different places to go. I don't know what the rules are about the Nintendo store. I don't even know if it's opened, but it's in a part of the city where it's worth walking around for a few minutes. So I would start in Rockefeller Center and go there. And then I would walk from there to J&L. And J&L is one of those stores it's kind of weird in that some of the stuff they have is kind of pricey and other stuff isn't, but they have a really wide variety of things from all different regions. And they're like a very chill store. Like you're never going to have anybody pressuring you to buy something expensive. Like go in, be nice, be respectful. They're nice to you, and that's it. So that's definitely a good place. Video Games New York is a bit south from that, so you're going to have to take either an Uber, a subway, cab, something like that. But it's very cool. It's in also kind of a neat area, but not like the iconic Rockefeller Center. It's just in another kind of neat area you might want to walk around in. And of course there's Brooklyn Video Games, which is a bit of a haul, but if you want to see like hardcore retro gaming at its best, they still have a BVM that they use up there. They have two cabs that have been completely rebuilt, and I think one, if not both, have a tube transplant from a consumer grade TV that looks flawless. It looks exactly like an arcade monitor would be. So that's absolutely worth it if you're really into seeing that stuff. And they do have they just got a couple of trade-ins of pretty amazing stuff in there as well. They got a bunch of Neo Geo games and stuff. And so that's certainly worth it. You just have to understand that that's a bit of a haul. So it's not like you could walk from there. Like you could definitely walk from, and probably should walk from, the Nintendo store to J&L, but you're not walking to those other places. I've been told there's some other video game stores in the city that I just haven't even gotten a chance to go to yet. But those are my favorites because you get to see a bunch of different unique things in there. And once again, I don't even know if the Nintendo store is open. This is probably the time that I would normally be like, hey, let's, I'll meet you down at Brooklyn Video Games and then we'll go out to the bar. But all that stuff's kind of locked down. It's a little complicated. So good luck in your travels around the city. At the very least, I know J&L and Brooklyn Video Games, I believe Video Games New York are open, and they're cool places to travel to. So good luck and have a lot of fun. Zabernaki says they're keen to use Woozle's Game Boy Advance consolizer on their BVM, but it's only HDMI out. Is there any other option other than an HDMI to component box to do this? I'm not against it. I would just love to limit the amount of tech between a source and my monitor. I think I discussed this a few weeks ago, so I'm just going to give the short version rather than rant for 10 minutes. As long as your BVM can handle 720p, just using component video converters, especially the ones that I've already tested that are definitely zero lag, is by far the easiest way to do this. There could be some stuff coming in the future that converts HDMI to RGB SCART, but who knows when that project's going to be done. And I really just think that it's such a cheap and easy solution that while, yes, it's annoying to add one more thing, I would pick that one up because that's also a tool that for the $10 or $12 it costs, you're probably going to be able to use that in other scenarios, even if it's just for testing. It's one of those things that might eventually end up in a box somewhere, but you're going to take it out once a year and go, man, I'm really glad I have this. So at least in my opinion, if you're a fiddler, if you're somebody that just likes to leave things hooked up and never touches it, that's a different story. But I would do that. And the only other suggestion would be if you have only an RGB SCART setup, you could get a HDMI to VGA and then have a sync combining cable built, just like the post on RetroRGB. Don't just tie the H and V syncs together. You could do that as well and then integrate it right into the setup, but now it's a lot more costly and a lot more complicated as opposed to just plugging that in. So hopefully that pointed you in the right direction. Jason Guffey has a handheld related question. They're trying to find a PSP 2 or 3000 unit that they could play on a TV, but a lot of the ones they find for decent prices usually describe having an issue with a button or something wrong with the screen. The screen doesn't matter much as they plan on using it on their TV, but it never occurred to me that playing PSP this way requires using the system itself as a controller. That means I'm stuck using the awful control nub and any buttons that may be non-functional or not easily fixed. I'd love to try and use a controller instead, but everything I find online is either some shady adapter with no documentation or a method involving emulation in PC applications. Just wondering if you were aware of any decent way to set this kind of thing up or where to look. Maybe someone's working on a PSP consolizer. They know the PSP Go can use PS3 controllers, but that system's download only and doesn't seem to work with TVs. So first of all, just because there's no documentation and it's on eBay doesn't necessarily mean that it's shady. It's very good that you're taking pause before buying something random off of eBay because of all the nightmare solutions out there. And by the way, a lot of those eBay sellers that I complain about are still there. They're still ripping people off. I'm still getting a bunch of emails like, why don't you do something about it? As if I could do something about it. But I understand people are frustrated. So yes, take caution, but also this could just be somebody that's not very good at marketing and just makes good adapters and says, here's my adapter. So while I don't know anything about those, that's something that's worth looking into. And depending on the way the PSP controls work, you might be able to make your own controller adapter for it. It could be possible that you could take something like an original PlayStation controller, or I guess maybe start with a third party because it would involve completely hacking and ruining the circuit board and the controller. But it could be a project that you might be into. You would have to hand wire it and all that stuff. But as far as a consolization kit, I haven't heard of any, but I'm also not 100% up to date on handheld stuff. Sometimes, like with the Game Boy screens, it changes so fast it's impossible for anybody to keep up. And also just because my focus has been on consoles and somewhat arcade stuff. So if anybody has any suggestions, please post and let us know. But I think you're kind of out of luck for this one. I think you might be better off at the moment doing like a pad replacement kit. See if Console 5 has those rubber pad replacements for the PSP, and then just kind of hunting around and seeing if anybody has anything. But it's definitely going to involve soldering. You're probably going to have to solder directly to the traces on the PSP's board where the buttons already are, and just interface with that. So not a solution that I know of, but if anybody hears of any, please let me know, because I think a bunch of people would like your same exact scenario. Lopo wants to know if there's any way they could refurbish their childhood Wii. It has visual issues and quirks from age. With plastic, shiny plastic like that, it's very hard. Once you start scuffing it up, I've seen different kind of polishes you could use. There's one kind of plastic polish that leaves it does fill in cracks, but it leaves like a weird film on it. And every time a friend of mine sent me a TurboGrafx with that kind of stuff on there, and every time I touch the TurboGrafx, my hands feel gross. And I've even tried washing it off, and it did a great job making the console look good, but the TurboGrafx is also more of a matte finish and not shiny. So if you want to refurbish it, I think the only thing you could do is get one of those case replacement kits, which you can get for fairly cheap now. I think you can get them $50 or less, which a few years ago they were double that. And you can get like a clear case or something, clear colored. I personally am just getting a Wii Dual modded for me, and I chose the all clear case because I think it's neat. So I think that would probably be the best bet, although it is a giant pain to disassemble a Wii, so just know that going into it. But I think visually speaking, the best bet would be to get a replacement case and then just save yours in a box somewhere in case for whatever reason you want to swap back to the original someday. Joaquin Coelho said after not using their Jaguar for a long time, they decided to take it out and noticed that it took a long while, maybe 40 seconds, to show a video signal. It's like it warmed up before actually powering on, which is kind of strange. The red LED slowly came up, and then the console started emitting this weird whining sound until it went slowly down. At the end, the console worked normally for a while, and they decided to do a full recap, which they just finished. Afterwards, they got the same exact issue when they plugged it in the first time. It took a long time to power on, light came up slowly. Any idea where it's coming from? So definitely change the power supply that you're using. I believe it uses a standard Genesis 1 power supply, which means you could just go to Castlemania, check that post from a few weeks ago on RetroRGB, but you could go right to Castlemania and get the exact Genesis power supply. And even if not, even if the Jaguar, here, let me grab mine right here. Even if the Jaguar uses a higher draws more power, you could use the WSU090-3500-R, and just make sure to get that exact model number, because sometimes like the dash means polarity and stuff like that. But that's 9 volt 3.5 amp power supply, and these are tested and known to be good, and I use this with all Genesis 1 compatible stuff. The one from Castlemania should be perfect for your Jaguar. It should have more than enough power, but the model number that I just called out, if you want to be extra safe, I guess you could pick one of those up. But either way, that would be the first thing that I would check, is the power supply you're using. And after that, I mean, the Jaguar is a weird console. I have so many problems with my Jaguars, and even one that I got that was supposedly working gave me trouble. I sent it to James from Retro HQ to take a look, because he just wanted to make sure it wasn't a problem with his ROM cart, which it wasn't. It was a problem with the Jaguar revision, and even he recapped that one and checked it all out, and still had the same issues. He actually added some firmware updates to his ROM cart to get around the issue with this motherboard revision Jaguar. So it's a very finicky console, but if you've done a recap and you use a known good power supply for it, then you shouldn't have any trouble whatsoever. And if you do, I don't know, I think I might, as long as it still works, I think you've done just about all you could do. You could try looking for voltage regulators in there. If you're in a really humid climate, it's possible. I mean, 7805s, they're still working in Atari 2600s, so I would double check that maybe as well. It also wouldn't hurt if you replace the voltage regulator with its exact replacement. It's not going to hurt anything. You just might not have had to have replaced it. So that's another decent thing to try. But power supply, external power supply, maybe voltage regulator. And, if anybody knows of this problem, please chime in, because it could just be an issue that I haven't heard of before. But Jaguars are finicky beasts. Another one from Joaquin. They recently recapped the Sega Saturn power supply and learned something that they'd like to discuss. It seems that you should not use low ESR capacitors on the Yamaha XS205 revision D. It doesn't like them, and you'll get these weird video noise in the form of horizontal lines. While Googling the issue, they found some old posts referring to similar ones, but was also surprised with a few recent posts from people doing recaps on Saturn. So I think that the issue is that people are making cap lists that don't know how to make cap lists. I'm not saying that to be disrespectful. I'm saying that because I am one of those people. I'm also just lucky enough to have some super nerd friends to help with this. But there's been many times which I've built a cap list for something, which at the end of the list I said, hey, this cap doesn't look the same as the others. What's different about it? And somebody will point out, hey, that's a label that represents it's this type of cap or that type. And sometimes I can't even find the right type at all. So that's why I always go to Console 5 to get my cap kits. Luke does a great job getting the right ones. You just don't have to worry about it. You get the kit, you install it. And if for whatever reason there is a problem, he's been awesome supporting people. And if there's an issue, he'd correct it right away. So the only word of advice I have for people looking to do this is check Console 5 first. The quality is up there. It's not like he uses cheap caps. He uses the good stuff. And it just makes your life so much easier. And if you're making your own cap list for anything, take really good pictures, take really good documentation. Each capacitor, write down the label, C5 equals 220 microfarad, 16 volt, whatever, and share that with people so that maybe somebody else looking to do the same thing that might have more experience goes, oh, hey, no, that's not this type of cap, that's that type of cap. Because once again, I make that mistake all the time. So I think I understood the question correctly. I don't think you bought the kit from Console 5. It just sounds like you ran into the same issue I've run into a whole bunch of times, that you thought one cap was one way and you went and grabbed that one. So it's hard to do maintenance on this stuff, but look at the bright side. It's easier than rebuilding a car. Diego said they just got a Neo Geo MVS 1FZ and just pre-ordered the Behar Brothers Shogun Supergun. Would it be recommended to still mod it with RGB, stereo sound, region-free, Unibios, etc.? They plan on buying a Neo SD, but it's expensive at the moment. Are there any alternatives? So a couple answers to that. First, the Shogun should be all you need for RGB. I would just double check if there's any jumpers that need to be set because you're using the 1FC instead of the 1B or C models. I believe you could get stereo audio without any modding whatsoever. I'm not remembering off the top of my head, but at the very least, it would be a minor mod that you would have to do. It certainly is on the MV1B and C. It's a super easy mod if you have the right supergun, so I'm pretty sure the Shogun takes care of all of that. As for region-free in the Unibios, it's always been my suggestion, and some people disagree, this is just my opinion, that if you're going to be pretty much only using a ROM cart like the Neo SD or Darksoft, then you don't need the Unibios, because it has almost every feature in there that you would need. But on the other side of that, if you want to play mostly original carts or a mix of both, I genuinely think the Unibios is something that you should consider a must-have if you're a Neo Geo enthusiast, because it just allows for every option you could imagine, and it's very reasonably priced. I'm not sure what's going on with the official store, but either way, it should be pretty easy to pick up and a very easy mod to do. As far as any recommendable alternatives, I mean, you could get one of those multi-carts, but I've just had so much bad luck with those. There are some out there that you could mod, so while they're still not good, they won't kill your Neo Geo right away, but I know a few people that I'm pretty convinced that the reason their MVS board died is because they used an unmodded version of the original 161-1, and the voltage just killed the cart. This wasn't like, this was one of the, without going down a rat hole here, when Renee and I did that video and Renee did all that research, the point we wanted to make to everybody is that ROM carts in certain repros that don't run at the correct voltage most of the time won't hurt the console at all. If anything, it would lower the life of the cart, but it's just good practice. It's not something that you have to really worry about. Whereas the NES 101 or whatever, there was one incredibly bad one for the NES, and the 161-1 could potentially do damage to your boards. So, if you're really on a budget, and you maybe could score another Neo Geo board cheap, it might be worth it. Because, as much as I don't ever like wasting things, cost would have to come into play. If a Neo SD or the Darksoft cart are $500, which I think they've gone down in price a bit, but let's just say $400, and you could get a 161-1 for $100 and another Neo Geo motherboard for $50, it's real tempting to spend that $150 and just kind of hope that motherboard lasts until you could save up to upgrade to the other one. So that's just my opinion, of course. I just try to share my experiences in this stuff. I've known people that have used the 161-1s for years and it still works totally fine. So it's not guaranteed to kill your motherboard. It's just not a risk I would really want to take. So I guess I would just kind of take a step back and check all of that out. And if you want to know the differences between the Darksoft and the Neo SD, just check out that video I did a while back. It's still totally relevant for the cheaper versions. The Pro has some new features added onto it, and both have gotten firmware updates to make it a little quicker, a little more stable. I would just choose it based on the way they work and what fits your needs the best. Tony wanted to chime in about recommendations for N64 joystick replacements. Kitsch Bent, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, sell replacement full gear sets and joysticks. They recently picked up a set, and Tony said they feel like OEM quality. So for the price, it's probably worth checking out. And it's store.kitsch-bent.com. That's KITSCH. So thank you very much for the recommendation. And, if you're out there, I guess, based on the price you're saying, just a few dollars, it's certainly worth trying. Raymond DeVrade has a question. Raymond, did I get your name right? I'm guessing based on the fact that you said you're from the Netherlands, but I could have totally just murdered that pronunciation. My apologies. Anyway, question is, they're moving and want to buy an arcade cabinet. A friend of theirs can make one, but they were reading things and said they would like to have a Pandora's box in it. But then they read about a lot of latency or emulation issues. Which multi-game solution would you advise me in a cabinet with an LCD screen without annoying lag? Honestly, as weird as this is going to sound, if you don't want to mess with things too much, grab a Raspberry Pi 4. Get one of those basic, you could, even if you don't like tinkering, you could find those pre-configured arcade setups. You have to do a bit of creative Googling, but there are people out there with images where you just, it requires like a 64 gig micro SD. You image it and it's done. It's got the arcade games pre-configured. The latency is reasonable. In my limited testing, the latency was better than the Pandora's box, that's for sure. I haven't tested one of those in a long time, but even a Raspberry Pi 3, I think, had less frames of lag than that. And it's probably just going to be cheaper and more configurable. Now, there's always the just use a Raspberry Pi, everybody gets angry over that. But the truth is, the only time I ever get annoyed is if you're talking about a video of, like, if your question was, how do I restore an original arcade cabinet? I would be a moron to say use a Raspberry Pi, because that's not what you're asking. But if you're saying you're looking to have an emulation solution, I completely understand the appeal of something like a Pandora's box, because you can just plug it in and everything's already working. All you have to do is plug it in. But it's absolutely worth the time to create your own solution. And, depending if you're an IT person, if you have nerd friends, you could even repurpose an old computer that would be substantially faster than a Raspberry Pi. Get one of those Linux builds. I keep trying to write up a post that Dan Mons did about a specific Linux build for MAME that's been great. I just haven't had any time because I want to test it so I could really add some thought to the posts and put pictures of it. But I mean, the point is, if you're going to take the time to build an arcade cabinet, you're not looking for original hardware, you're not looking for a plug and play solution, I would definitely recommend taking a little bit more time to build the right software solution as well. Raspberry Pi is about as easy as it gets. You can get better performance. Heck, you could even take a laptop with a broken screen. That's something I've seen done a lot. Take apart the laptop, make sure to clean out all the fans with compressed air and all that stuff. Maybe even replace the fan and put new thermal paste on it. Just rip the screen off, and then now you have your output from that. And you could potentially get a really fast laptop with a broken screen and a broken keyboard, which you don't need any of, for very, very cheap. So, maybe twice the price of a Raspberry Pi, but twice the performance out of it. So it's certainly worth looking into all these extra steps. I just really wouldn't recommend a Pandora's box unless you absolutely knew that was your only choice for whatever reason. So hopefully I added some perspective to that. Scanline City wants me to recommend some of my top DVD or Blu-ray players for use with BVMs and PVMs. So that is a good question. That is one that I would love to spend an entire video talking about with details and screenshots, but I don't have time for that, so I'm just going to answer your question with words this time. My favorite these days is the PS3, just because it's right here. Component video output with the HD RetroVision cables is great. It plays the discs I want good enough. So that's what I've been using just out of convenience, and if you have that, if it's your only solution at the moment, it's a great solution. So you certainly don't think it's like a mediocre get you by solution. It's a great solution. But my top players are the Oppos, because a while back, it's probably 10 years ago now, actually, but there were a few reviewers for higher end video places doing reviews of all the new Blu-ray players, and they had tested like a $1,500 one, and they tested like a $200 one, and at the time, all the Oppo players were around $500. And what they found was, when they put it on a scope, they realized that the HDMI test patterns, the only players that got it one-to-one perfect were the Oppos. The rest messed with the signal at least a little bit. Now, what does that mean for real-life performance? Probably nothing. Probably zero difference that a human eye could see. But knowing that, and knowing that they also would play back movies off of USB sticks, and some of them could play 3D movies too, those have been my go-to. And I still, as much as I would like to get rid of my giant Ultra HD Oppo player that I only really use for 3D movies and the occasional 4K UHD disc that's actually 4K, that's a whole other rant that I could go on. It really still is the best solution for all that stuff. So if you have the cash to spend and you're really looking for something like that, I believe it's the 80 series, the DVD-8 something. Please don't quote me on that one, but I believe one of the DVD-only versions of it had one of the best deinterlacers to ever be included in a DVD player. Now, of course, you can get something like a DVD-O separately. There's a whole bunch of things. Just as far as like something with it already built in, that would work. And then any of the ones with source direct mode might be a help for DVDs if you're just looking for the content exactly as it is on the disc. And same thing, the BDP 93 plays every Blu-ray disc, including ISOs. You just gotta get the one with the right firmware on it. Plays DVDs great, and that's what I used to use to take Blu-rays. So yeah, they're 1080p, but I would run them in 480p through the BVM, and that's what got my favorite look for a lot of these old movies. And that's what I talk about when I say like, hey, there's on a 4K OLED, all you see is film grain in the background, but you put it through a BVM, it looks really clear. The scan lines, the mask of the CRT itself definitely hides all of that grain, and it really gives a very cool look to it. Once again, though, you could just do that with a PS3. The only complaint I have about a PS3 is you can't just stick in a USB stick and go, and there still aren't good, as far as I know, aren't really good over-the-network media players for that. I think, to be honest, the Xbox would probably still be the best way to play any content up to 720p, I believe, if you just want to stream from wherever your server is to the Xbox out via component video. So I guess as gamers, Xbox for streaming your own content, not Netflix, PS3 for discs, and then if you really want to get crazy, grab one of the Oppo players. And then I just would only recommend spending the money on the Oppo if you're going to use it for other things. I personally wouldn't spend all that money just to have DVDs on a BVM. I would only get that if I'm going to also use it for this, that, the other thing, whatever else. So once again, do whatever you like, though. I just wanted to share my thoughts on it. But yeah, it's a fun subject that I could talk for a long time about, and I do eventually hope to do a video on it. Mark Main wants to know if it's possible for an N64 flash cart to play 64 disk drive games. I thought the EverDrives could already do that. I might be misunderstanding. N64 isn't my favorite console, so I don't spend a lot of time with it, but I could swear reading on Crix's website, on the forums at least, that people had gotten at least a few of the 64 DD games working, and if not, the other ROM cart out there probably would, but I would go directly to Crix's website, crix.com, go to the forums, go to the N64 section, and just scroll through there, and you should be able to get your answer. I could swear at least a handful of the games were running, if not all of them, but you should be able to get your exact answer right there. Outer Zevin said Jose is going to be installing the triple bypass in their Genesis 1 soon, and they were wondering, once this mod's done, what's the best way to connect a Genesis 1 to a Sega CD Model 2 into 32X. I actually did a video about this, the Genesis getting started basics thing. As long as you're getting the Genesis 2 connector installed into your Genesis 1, which Jose would always do unless you specifically said not to, I guess, because that's one of my favorite upgrades too, because now you don't have to worry about Genesis, Sega CD, and 32X. At this point, just treat it like a Genesis 2, which means you simply connect the Genesis 2 port that's now being installed from the Genesis to the 32X, get video out from there, and I would leave audio alone. I would leave audio through the main cable. There are some scenarios in which people might want unfiltered CDDA audio through the RCA jacks in the back of the Sega CD. But if you don't know what that is, do not worry about it. This is more of the audiophile MD4EA crew that loves to dig into the differences. All of my testing is always from the DIN, and I would kind of just go about it that way to make things easier. If for whatever reason you're keeping the original port on the Genesis 1, which some people do, they just want to keep the outside looking stock, even though it's still a no-cut mod either way, but I would order that special cable from Retro Access that turns the Genesis 1 port into a Genesis 2 port. So you get the audio from the front headphone jack, you plug this into the back, and then it leaves just a receptacle Genesis 2 port for the same reasons that I just said. Now it just treats it like a Genesis Model 2. The reason that's so important to me, by the way, is because there are some scenarios in which you have to take off the 32X. It will not play Master System games, even through a ROM cart, and it will not play Virtua Racing, and sometimes it's kind of ugly. Some people just don't like it. And if that's the case, you would then have to have 2 RGB cables, one for the Genesis 1 connector, one for the 32X connector. So using the methods that I just said are both easier, and they're about the same price, even if, because you'd still have to buy 2 cables, but it's just much easier because you don't have to be unplugging the SCART side every time. So check out that video. Just search YouTube for RetroRGB Genesis and it should pop up. I think that's the thumbnail is some ridiculous thing with a tower of power with the master gear converter on top or something. But definitely check that out, and it should answer all your questions. Alex Shamai had a good question, and I'm going to have a cop-out answer for this. I'm sorry. The question is, what are my top 10 favorite consoles to play? What are the ones I know the most about regarding design issues, mods, bugs, model revisions, etc.? So my number one favorite console to play is whatever is the easiest thing to turn on right now, because the way everything's set up here, I set my whole apartment up for testing, not for playing. So every time I want to play, I have to find the box that the console's in, find the cables, find the power supply adapters, wheel something over, decide if I want to play on a monitor or my flat panel. So for a while there, I had my mini MVS on a cart, which was just right accessible, right in front of a chair. Like you could just turn the chair around. It was already plugged into the wall. All you have to do is reach in back and turn it on. So I played a whole bunch of Neo Turf Masters and a bunch of random Neo Geo games because it was a one button push to start playing. But that's, when I had my whole system set up, I kind of had the opposite, in which I was a little overwhelmed. Like, oh, there's all these amazing consoles. What do I want to try today? So I don't know. That's definitely my favorite one to play. Is just whatever's the easiest. I played a bunch of Switch recently for that same reason. And one of these days I'll get a real people-sized place, and I'll be able to answer that a little bit better. As far as what consoles I know the most about are my 2 favorites, Super Nintendo and Genesis. I also know quite a bit about the NES and then a little bit about everything. But that's kind of my job, is I don't necessarily need to be an expert in one thing. I need to know just enough to talk to the experts so that I can continue to be the middleman. So, SNES, Super Nintendo, SNES, whatever you want to call it, and the Sega Genesis, at least the North American models of both are the ones I have the most knowledge about. And I guess especially the Super Nintendo, because I dug in real deep with that when I first started RetroRGB. I distinctly remember laying awake one night trying to figure out if there was a way to make the big size Super Nintendos output as good of a video as the minis, because I just really liked the way the originals looked. I just remember visualizing in my head, what is the layout of the motherboard like? Are there things we could use to improve it? Are there ways that we could bypass certain video signals? And then, fast forward a couple months or a year or something, and I'm friends with Bordy, I'm friends with Voltar. We're doing exactly all of that. So, Super Nintendo is probably the one I know the most about, but I do kind of like them all for their own weird, even the bad ones I like for the weird reasons. So sorry for the cop-out answer. It's just the truth at the moment, at least. Alohart said they have a Trinitron 36FS120 CRT TV, and they've connected their Dreamcast through a SCART cable to a RetroTink RGB to comp to the component input on the TV, and they're having an issue with light guns. They seem to work fine in a region towards the center of the screen, but they don't seem to get better recognition elsewhere. Unfortunately, what you just did was you just proved 2 things that we've been talking about for a while, but I guess I need to talk about it a little bit better on the website. First, you've proved that a SCART cable through the RGB to comp does work with light guns, but you have a Sony Trinitron flat tube TV or flat glass TV, and those do mess with light guns. Now, I've had some that work. I did have one 24-inch with the flat glass in front that still worked fine with light guns, even in the corners, but most don't. Most flat glass CRTs have the exact issue that you're talking about. So I really wish it was something I could say, oh yeah, switch from this adapter to that adapter. But what you have is a very, very amazing CRT, but with flat glass, you're not going to be able to get most light guns working on it properly. So sorry for the bad news. Definitely keep it though, because that thing is a monster and an amazing CRT. I wish there was some other mod that you could do to it, but I don't think you're going to be able to get it working with pretty much any light gun because of that. Matthew Underwood said someone gave them a pretty standard 90s VGA computer monitor and they want to get rid of it. It sometimes loses certain colors and they have no use for it, and they want to make sure that the tube doesn't get trashed. So what do you think is the best way to get rid of it? free on Craigslist. I doubt anyone will pay $20. I'm not trying to make money. I just figured that if someone pays something for it, it's less likely it will get recycled. If you live in a house and not an apartment, my suggestion is definitely Craigslist, free, and then just tell people, let me know what time you're coming by. I'll leave it at the end of my driveway type of thing. And that way you don't even have to meet anybody. You don't have to worry about scams or anything else. You don't even have to be there. Just don't leave it out in the rain, obviously. If you live in an apartment, I don't know. It's a very commendable thing that you don't want to just throw out something that is probably useful to somebody. But that is a bit of a pain because now you're going to have to go through all of the same headaches of selling something, even if it's free. So if you live in an apartment, I would probably say $5 firm or something like that, just to try to weed out the people that are crazy and go from there. But that's, I definitely, it's very commendable that you're trying to keep that monitor alive and give it to somebody without just throwing it out. I can't really think of anything else, to be honest with you. Maybe worst case, drop it off at a thrift shop and have them sell it for $5 or something, if they'll even accept it. For a while, there was like a good 2-year chunk where all of those stores stopped accepting CRTs because then they eventually would just have to pay an electronics recycling store to come get them. But I think it's swung back around now. I think that little Sony consumer grade CRT I show in a lot of my videos, I bought that for $30 because my buddy Bernie found it for me at a place in Astoria. So it's, I'm happy to throw money to keep a thrift store alive if it's a fair price. So that's it's an interesting problem to have. But thanks for taking the time to try and save that monitor. SilentJet85 wanted to respond to the person looking for a replacement for the N64 stick. They recommended the Steel Stick 64 or Prestige 64 kits, but those are often out of stock because I guess they're pretty labor intensive. So I have not tested either of these myself. I know there's a lot that goes into it, and even a well-built one still might have issues or might not. I'm really not an expert at all, so I think I'm just going to leave SilentJet's post in the YouTube description of this for anybody that wants it. I'll actually probably pin the post or something like that just to make sure the info is out there. Just keep in mind I haven't had a chance to test any of this myself, but I do really appreciate SilentJet taking the time to post all this stuff. It's definitely good info. VG Collectaholic had a bunch of very nice things to say. Thank you very much. And then wanted to know if I had any recommendations on HDMI switching options. They've been using their Marantz AVR's 8 HDMI inputs daisy-chained together with a few automatic switches, but have been wondering about whether a daisy-chain setup like this might be introducing layers of lag. So I have two answers to that are my very strong opinion on this. Number one, if you found yourself an HDMI switching solution that could work with retro stuff, the OSSC, and modern stuff, if you found something that works, you might want to leave that alone. If you've been playing on it, you don't notice any lag. I mean, HDMI switches and combining stuff like this has been a nightmare for me, especially because I'm constantly swapping stuff around, power cycling, trying different mods. My setup is not a normal gaming setup. It's a testing setup. So if you found something that works, that's awesome. The only other thing to that is this really would be where a time sleuth would come in handy. So if you have no desire to own a time sleuth because you really only need to test it this one time, maybe look into borrowing one, maybe check out the Raspberry Pi version that I have sitting right here. I actually have 4 lag test devices that I'm so backlogged. I want to get to that, but I'm going to do a lag test device shootout thing. And I actually think they're all going to be accurate, and there's just different ways to go about the same thing. But honestly, though, it sounds like if you have an awesome setup like your own, spending a few dollars on a time sleuth, you'll probably use it more than you would think. You'll find yourself like somebody, I forgot where I was the other day, but I walked in and I had cargo shorts on, and somebody was like, "Hey, do you have a time sleuth in there?" I started laughing because I was like, I might. That's a very fair thing to ask because I do tend to test everything when I go to friends' houses. So I would just consider picking one up and trying it. And if you do find any lag whatsoever, go down the chain. So if you have it plugged into one of the Kinvo switches, then go into the Marantz, then go directly into your TV, or actually the opposite, start with the TV and work your way back and see if anything adds to it. But I mean, when you have a pretty lengthy setup like yours, I would definitely consider at least picking one up to try. But overall, sounds like you have an awesome setup. Illuminato also wanted to chime in about the N64 stick issue and also recommended the Kitsch bent ones. Kitsch bent. I can't pronounce that today. I don't know what the heck's wrong with me. I'm trying though. Also, Illuminato said you could just buy the replacement parts, and along with some silicone grease and a slight retention of the spring, you could return your N64 to a fresh-ish new state. So I definitely appreciate everybody's thoughts on that. It's the N64 stick issue is something that's plagued everybody. Louis Cesaran wanted to chime in about the FRAM mod from last week. So just a quick recap. Somebody had said they found data saying that if you cut the trace from the from the battery to the real-time clock in a Sega Saturn, that only the backup chip will be drawing power from the battery, and theoretically it would last longer. And Lewis says that he remembered reading a tech blog a while ago that said the opposite, that the real-time clock wasn't the thing that drew the most power. The RAM chip was, or the backup memory chip would be. So it would kind of be a moot point. And while I certainly appreciate both feedback, and while I've also read both myself, I think my stance on this is the same, in that you got to just choose which way you're going to go. Are you going to buy yourself the backup cartridge, or I guess even use the Satiator's new save game thing? But either way, you're either going to have to always, buy yourself a big bag of batteries off of eBay for $10 and constantly be keeping up on this. So plug it in, leave it plugged in, have the battery inside of it. And then every time you play your games, make sure to back up or restore your save games. And then every time you power on your Saturn, double check that clock. If or you don't have to go into the settings, but just pay attention. If it asks you to set the clock, power off the Saturn, swap the battery, and then, continue and go for it that way. Or the opposite, just do the FRAM mod. But I don't think that most people would think it was worth the time to completely disassemble a Saturn and cut either trace, either to the real-time clock or to the or to the RAM and route battery elsewhere or something like that. I don't think that would be the best way to go. I really think you should go all or nothing. I do change my opinion sometimes, though. Maybe it's something that I'll evolve into, but I just think if you have a no-cut, no-mod solution available already, that's perfect for everybody who doesn't want to mess with it. And then you have a modding solution available that just solves the problem altogether. So that's definitely how I would lean. So thanks very much, Lewis. I did remember reading that as well, same as you. And I did kind of like the theory of this, though, but I do think it's one of those things that's a moot point. Just take your no-cut solution, or no-mod solution. I'm so used to saying no-cut everything. Take your no-mod solution or take your mod solution, and I wouldn't spend the time on anything in between. Lastly, Jared Breland says, not related to this video, but just wanted to say thank you for the heads up you give your viewers and listeners on pre-orders for popular items. I had a reminder on my calendar for the GC Loader pre-order and snagged one right at 10. Refreshed the page at 10:15 just out of curiosity, and it's already out of stock. Would have completely missed that if you hadn't provided a heads up a couple days ago. Thanks. So thank you so much for the kind words, but I wanted to talk about this because it's something I'm extremely proud of. The team of writers that donate their time to RetroRGB are amazing, and I love all of the thought they put behind this. I love the posts that they write that I would have never thought to write or don't have the knowledge to write. I love their own perspectives on everything, but I equally as much love the post that's GC Loader Thursday at 10 a.m. Here's the link, and with nothing else, because sometimes that's the most important thing. While an extremely well-written post about something you didn't know anything about sparks your interest is wonderful, and I love them all for that. I do love equally just the 3-line, don't forget about this thing because of exactly what you described. I really do think that is a help to everybody, and I think a lot more people than I realized were hooking up their RSS readers to RetroRGB and all that stuff. And there was going to be a bot that only tweets when there's a news post, but there was 4 or 5 other things that were going to get implemented that same time. And then when lockdown happened and everything went crazy, this was on the list to do for the 200th episode celebration, if you will, but all of that got pushed back as other things had to jump to the front of priority. But I will get back into that. I mean, probably next year at this point. But I thank you for the kind words. I do definitely want to take this moment to shout out to all the writers, because that stuff, in my opinion, is so important. And I'm so glad we're able to get the right info into people's hands. Well, that's it for this time. As always, thanks so much to everybody that participates in these. I really do have a great time doing them. And if you're new to all this, ask any question you have wherever the latest support post is in any of these services. The way they work, I can't figure out which is a new or an old post from previous weeks. So wherever you find this or the newest Q&A, post your question there for next week and I will get to it. And if I miss it, please ask it again. It's never intentional. It's always that accidentally got deleted in post or something. So, or maybe the questions came in after I started already shooting this and didn't get to refresh the page in time or something. Hopefully that didn't happen today because I recorded it on time and not early. But anyway, thank you all so much. None of the stuff that I do could happen without all of your support. I appreciate it so much, and I'll see you next time.